Well, I mean, from ESSA's perspective, we were really at the beginning of that process. We've been speaking with the leagues. We've spoken with the NFL, NHL, MLB, NBA, all the four big leagues, about having an exchange of information. But actually, the reality is a lot more complicated because you have the dreaded four letters, GDPR, which got implemented this year, and that makes transferring data from Europe or from European operators. So just to explain how ESSA works, we're the first level. So our members feed into an alert platform and they share information on unusual events. We have a betting integrity officer that analyzes this. If he sees anything which is suspicious, he follows up with the operator, gets more information. He will then file a report to the relevant sport or regulator. And that's fine in Europe, because we share the same data protection laws generally, which has now been placed with the regulation. But when you go to the US, it's a very different situation. And so the conversations we've been having are based around how do we exchange that data.
Just from our experience of entering multiple newly regulated markets over the last 2 years, if you look at Denmark, if you look at Portugal, as soon as a market re-regulates or regulates for the first time, there's clearly a shift of turnover to the newly regulated operators, and essentially the black or grey market slowly diminishes. So it's our expectations that will definitely shrink significantly.
Okay, Kevin.
I think in many respects, and Kevin alluded to this earlier, European operators are already inputting into the US environment and have been for several years. I think that's obvious with the work of companies like Genius and Perform. We're both working for rights holders in the US, helping protect events on US soil. So you can argue that this is already happening, and European operators are playing a major part in that. I think the other thing to remember, and we were talking about this earlier, is bringing the US, increasing the level of understanding now that the market is opening up in terms of the type of bets that are going to be offered, the risks that they're going to face, and almost there's been quite a lot of scaremongering in the press around, again, those types of new markets, particularly in-play, proposition bets, interval bets, all these sorts of things. It's down to companies like ours to go and speak to the US sports, to educate them on the risks, but also to kind of disabuse them of some of the scaremongering that is taking place. And overall, as Ludovico said, the benefits of a regulated market are going to overtake everything else. And just before I pass it on, everything that Khalid is talking about, all the work that organisations like ESSA do, that GLMS do in Europe, actually means that the US is in a great position, because it's the first market to open up that it's just going to be able to plug into all this.
Yeah, I mean, if we go back 10 years, I mean, the European experience was, I'm speaking from an operator's point of view, we were at loggerheads with many of the sports. They were blaming the betting operators for the integrity issues. And I think Jake touched upon a really important point. That's about raising awareness and educating how the betting markets actually operate. I mean, last week we took almost 20 traders from some of the biggest betting operators to the IOC's offices in Lausanne, sat down with the IOC, had an exchange and a dialogue about how we operate and also what their concerns were as well. But that took a long time to get to that point. And I think if there's one thing that we can take away and probably try and implement as soon as possible in the US, is to have that exchange and that dialogue with the sports. It's not us against them, it's us working together as one. And that's going to be really important. Now, the way that the debate has already opened up, there was talk about an integrity fee, etc. That's probably slipped away now, I think. Maybe in some states it could still be there. But these are issues which will be a sticking block in terms of wanting to build those relationships. I mean, absolutely. I mean, look, if you look at just channeling rates in Europe, I mean, if you look at Denmark and you look at the UK, I mean, they have a GGR of between 15 to 20%. The channeling rates are between 90 to 95%. You take France, Poland, they have a turnover tax of about between 9 to 12%. The channeling rates there are between 30 to 60%. And that is huge. So the US has to get that first part right on taxation. Right now, how do we exchange information? Well, with the big sports, we haven't seen anything. With tennis in the US, we have seen events, but that goes to the Tennis Integrity Units in London, which is where it's based, and they will then take it from there.
I think it's important when you're working with the sports, and one of the key sort of starting points from our perspective is the fact that, you know, the sports have to do a risk assessment of their position. Now, obviously for the United States sports bodies, that will open up a lot more new areas for them than would be potentially for European sports. But I think we would look at things like the visibility in terms of, I've already talked about the types of bets, the sort of operators already offering bets on their markets. It would also look to key things such as the cooperation and collaboration. And I think when we're looking to overcome issues like Khalid mentioned about data protection issues, for example, as I've always said, of course, our relationships with sports are contractual. And I'm trying not to go back into my legal hat on, but actually, when you get into the next level, what data protection isn't there to do is to protect criminals. So once you start having criminals being involved in areas of integrity and match fixing and manipulation, that's not a reason not to share information. So, the US is in a great position, in my opinion, that they can learn from other jurisdictions who have either got it right, or in some cases have things to learn. So they can take the best bits from other jurisdictions and really go, this is our gold standard integrity offering to protect every stakeholder involved.
Well, just a few considerations to what you mentioned, Lee. Again, as Kevin said, sports integrity, just fighting match fixing, it's not only about banning athletes. We are talking about law enforcement agencies, regulators. We're talking about the social cost who is paid by the athletes, the consumer, the sports book. So it's a global, not US, global phenomenon. The money starts from the Far East and maybe lands somewhere else, where maybe US athletes are involved playing in a tennis game in China. So how do you deal with that? Of course, if you are not a global organization, and we are a non-profit organization, we rely on the efforts of every single trading rooms of our members to have this real-time messaging service. So whenever there is anything in the US, we go through either the law enforcement agency, in this case FBI, or sports integrity bodies such as the TIU, the Tennis Integrity Unit, and that's what we do. I feel strongly about collective responsibility and collective actions. If someone thinks that sports integrity can be safeguarded by just replicating small ring-fenced state-level bodies or association, will not go anywhere because it's global. The phenomenon is global. And you can have the basketball world championship next year in Beijing, where athletes are obviously playing, and bets are being taken in the US, and you know what? The league cannot do much. So it's at the moment the way it's working is that we are going through the existing law enforcement agencies who go through then the American sport leagues.
So I think just to kind of a huge sort of challenge, as I see it, for all of us involved in trying to protect integrity, is that betting markets are global, and the way that people who seek to corrupt sports operate globally and cross-border, and yet betting regulation happens on a national level. So really, we have to encourage regulators and law enforcement to talk to each other outside of their own borders. Otherwise, this is going to be very difficult to really protect.
This is exactly the problem or the risk that the US are going to face in terms of the regulation and the way it's going at the moment. So obviously, it's state by state as opposed to federal, and I think they're going to get to a point, and coming back to what Ludovico is talking about in terms of information sharing, if you're talking about state by state, then how is that going to work in terms of an information sharing platform? Are we looking at something state by state in terms of licensing and regulation of how the operators are actually functioning in terms of compliance, anti-money laundering, all those sorts of things? And then separately, are we talking about something at a federal level, which is an information sharing hub akin to, say, the Sports Betting Intelligence Unit that we have in the UK? Because otherwise, there's going to be blockers to that information sharing. And at the end of the day, as we've already said, it's about banning the sports and banning the athletes need to be banned, and also investigating those outside the sport that are corrupting those athletes. So it has to be a multi-agency approach, and the only way to do that is going to be on a national level. As part of what the work we do, aside from monitoring that Kevin's mentioned, we have a global intelligence program that operators from Europe, Asia, offshore all feed into on a daily basis to identify and report risks that either we've picked up ourselves and we go to them with, or that they proactively inform us about. Linked to that, we're an affiliate member of ESSA, which is really focused on that intelligence exchange. That's completely free of charge as part of our daily standard operations. So when it comes back to saying how much does this cost, well, that costs the infrastructure of putting together that team and the commitment to actually run with it. But that's not this is something that should happen as standard part of the way the industry does its business.